They smiled to his face every single morning. They laughed at his jokes. They ate lunch at the same table, called themselves his best friends. And then, when nobody was watching, they took everything he had worked 3 years to build and handed it to someone else. He didn't get mad. He didn't confront them. He didn't post about it. He simply waited. And the universe? The universe had a very long memory. Welcome back to Venture and Karma, the channel where we sit down, we get comfortable, and we let the world remind us that what goes around really does come back around. Sometimes slowly, sometimes spectacularly, but it always comes back. Today we have 3 stories pulled straight from the depths of Reddit. 3 real people who were betrayed by the ones they trusted the most. And in every single case, justice showed up in a way nobody could have scripted. So get comfortable. This one is gonna be good. Story 1. The colleague who stole my entire career and then asked me for a reference. This story was posted on the subreddit r/ProRevenge by a user going by the name ThunderousQuiet88. And I promise you, by the time we get to the end of it, your jaw is going to be on the floor. Our storyteller, let's call him Marcus, had been working at a mid-sized marketing firm for just over 3 years when all of this went down. He was the kind of employee every company quietly relies on, but rarely properly rewards. He showed up early, he stayed late, he took on the projects nobody else wanted, and somehow always delivered. But Marcus had a dream. He had spent the better part of 18 months quietly developing what he described as a complete digital strategy overhaul for one of the agency's longest-standing clients, a regional grocery chain that had been bleeding foot traffic to big box stores for years. He had built the entire framework himself in his own time, often at his kitchen table after dinner. He called it internally to himself in his notes, Project Harvest. The plan was detailed. It involved a hyper-local influencer seeding strategy, a loyalty app integration with geo-targeted push notifications, a seasonal content calendar tied to produce availability, and a community event series that would turn the stores into actual gathering places. It was, by any measure, genuinely brilliant work. He had one trusted colleague, someone he considered a work best friend. They'd been hired the same month, gone through onboarding together, complained about the same managers over the same mediocre office coffee for 3 years. Let's call this colleague Derek. Marcus made the mistake that almost all of us has made at least once in our lives. He shared his work in progress with someone he trusted completely. He walked Derek through the whole concept over a lunch break, showed him the slide deck, talked through the logic. Derek nodded, asked smart questions, and said, and I want you to hold on to this because it becomes deeply ironic later. He said, "Marcus, this is the best idea I've heard come out of this building in years." 2 weeks later, Marcus came into work to find an all-hands meeting had been scheduled. The subject line of the invite read, "Exciting new direction for Harmon Grocery Partnership." He sat down in the conference room with everybody else. The CEO walked in, and then Derek walked in, carrying a laptop, wearing the exact expression of someone who was either very proud of himself or very terrified of being found out. Possibly both. Derek presented Project Harvest. Not a version of it, not something inspired by it. He presented Marcus's slides, slightly reformatted with his own name on the title page, word for word, concept for concept, right down to the seasonal content calendar that Marcus had built around his own personal experience growing up near a farm. Marcus had included a note in his original draft about why the autumn harvest angle was emotionally resonant. Derek kept the note. He kept the note. The CEO loved it. The room loved it. Derek received a standing ovation, and within 48 hours, he was officially named the lead strategist on the account. It came with a title bump and a salary increase of roughly $12,000 a year. Marcus sat in that meeting and said nothing. He told Reddit later that his brain simply could not process what was happening fast enough to respond. By the time he'd recovered enough to speak, the meeting was over, and Derek had already been swarmed by congratulations. Marcus went home that night and did something very specific. He opened his laptop and he started documenting. He pulled the original files, every single one, with their creation timestamps intact. He found his email drafts where he'd been quietly workshopping ideas for months before ever showing Derek anything. He found a text message thread where he'd described the geo-targeting concept to his sister 3 months before the lunch meeting with Derek. He printed screenshots. He made backups on 3 separate drives. Then, and this is where it gets quietly devastating, he went looking for witnesses. It turned out that Marcus had mentioned the loyalty app concept in passing during a team brainstorm 6 months earlier. The meeting notes, taken by an admin assistant and stored in the company's shared drive, referenced M's app integration idea right there in black and white. He didn't do anything with this yet. He waited. Derek's new role meant Derek was now presenting Project Harvest directly to the client. Marcus was not involved. He continued doing his regular work, was professional and pleasant to everyone, including Derek, and quietly built his file. Here's where the karma truly begins to arrive. Roughly 2 months into Derek's tenure as lead strategist, the grocery chain client asked a very specific question during a meeting. They wanted to know the detailed reasoning behind the seasonal content calendar. They wanted to understand the emotional logic behind it because they were considering expanding the concept to cover spring and wanted to understand the original creator's thought process. Derek, who had memorized the bullet points but not the soul of the work, stumbled. He gave a technically accurate but completely hollow answer. The client noticed. Their main contact, a sharp woman in her 50s who had built her career in brand storytelling, later mentioned to the account manager that she found the lead strategist's answer oddly surface level for someone who apparently built the whole thing from the ground up. That comment made its way to the CEO. The CEO, now already suspect from the client's comments, didn't need much convincing. He called Derek in. Derek, faced with the time-stamped file evidence and the meeting notes, apparently tried to argue that the ideas were a collaborative evolution of earlier conversations, which collapsed immediately when Marcus pointed out that the note about his personal childhood connection to autumn harvesting was in the presentation verbatim. That's not collaboration, that's copying. Derek was let go within the week. The termination was quiet, as these things usually are, but word travels in agencies the way it always does. And the final beat, the one that made this story go somewhat viral on Reddit, about 3 months later, Marcus received a LinkedIn message. It was Derek. He was applying for a role at a competing firm and wanted to know if Marcus would be willing to serve as a professional reference. Marcus's response, which he posted in full, was 4 words: "I don't think so." The comments on the original post were predictably delighted, but what struck most people, and what struck me, wasn't the confrontation or the termination. It was the patience. Marcus never yelled, never accused, never made a scene. He simply built a quiet, airtight case and let the truth do the heavy lifting. And the universe, recognizing good documentation when it sees it, obliged.
Before we get into story 2, which involves a betrayal so audacious it honestly made me question whether some people have genuinely never considered the concept of consequences, I just want to say something. If you're new to this channel and this story hit you in a specific place, whether you've lived something like it or you just find this kind of deep, slow burn justice genuinely satisfying, hit that subscribe button right now. We put out new karma stories every single week, and I promise you, we don't do shallow. Every story we bring you is the kind that stays with you. We're building a community here of people who believe that honesty actually matters and that the universe keeps better receipts than most people think. If that's you, welcome. You're in the right place. Now, story 2.
Story 2. My best friend of 12 years stole my business idea, my investors, and my girlfriend. Here's what happened next. This one comes from r/TrueOffMyChest, posted by a user called Architect of Calm. And the title alone, before you even read a single word, tells you that whoever wrote this has done a significant amount of emotional processing. Let's call our storyteller Eli. Eli and his best friend, let's call him Bryce, had known each other since they were 17 years old. 12 years of friendship. They'd been in each other's weddings. Well, Bryce had been in Eli's, Eli had been Bryce's best man. They had the kind of friendship that people look at from the outside and actually feel good about. The kind that makes you think, okay, some things in life are real. Eli was the idea person. He'd always been the one with the vision, the creative engine, the guy who could walk through a problem and come out the other side with something nobody else had thought of. Bryce was the people person, charming, socially magnetic, the kind of guy who could walk into any room and within 20 minutes know everyone's name, job, and favorite sports team. On paper, they were built to be partners, which is why when Eli came up with the concept for his business, a curated subscription service for independent artists, connecting them directly with collectors and design-forward consumers, it seemed completely natural to bring Bryce in from the beginning. The concept was Eli's. The structural vision was Eli's. He'd spent almost a year building it in rough form, had a working prototype, had done initial customer discovery interviews, and even drafted a pitch deck. He brought Bryce in as a co-founder. Now, here is where I want to pause, because this is a dynamic that comes up again and again in these kinds of stories, and I think it's worth sitting with for a moment. There is a specific kind of betrayal that is uniquely painful because it comes from someone who has seen you at your most open. Not just professionally open, but personally open. Someone who has sat in your kitchen at 2 in the morning when things were hard. Someone who knows the story behind your ideas, not just the ideas themselves. Someone who has seen the version of you that exists before performance kicks in. That's who Bryce was to Eli, and that's what makes what comes next so particularly brutal. They began the formal co-founder process. Equity split was discussed. Eli proposed 60-40 given the year of solo development. Bryce agreed verbally, and they shook hands. They hadn't yet put anything in writing because, as Eli explained, when it's your best friend of 12 years, you don't think you need to rush the paperwork. Bryce took the lead on investor outreach because that was his strength. He was meeting with people, taking calls, building relationships. Eli was continuing to refine the product and build out the artist onboarding system. And then, over the course of about 6 weeks, quietly, carefully, surgically, Bryce began doing something with those investor relationships that Eli didn't know about. He was pitching a version of the company in which Eli wasn't mentioned. Not a different company, the same company, same name, same concept, same pitch deck that Eli had built. But when investors asked about the founding team, Bryce described himself as the sole founder and architect of the concept, with a small technical team supporting development. Eli found out by accident. One of the investors, a woman who ran a boutique creative fund and who had apparently liked Eli from a brief introduction months earlier, reached out to Eli directly to ask a question about the artist onboarding system. In the conversation, she mentioned something Bryce had said in their most recent meeting that struck her as slightly inconsistent with what she remembered Eli describing. Eli, confused, asked her to elaborate. She was kind enough to do so, fully, including forwarding the email thread. Eli read the email on his phone sitting in a car parking garage and described the experience as feeling like the floor dropped out from under him while the ceiling simultaneously came down. Because it wasn't just the business. While doing his own quiet investigation over the following week, checking investor correspondence Bryce had CC'd Eli on versus what was apparently sent separately, Eli also discovered something else. Bryce had been spending time with Eli's girlfriend, not professionally, not casually, not innocently. Eli's girlfriend, when confronted gently, confirmed it. She was tearful. She said it had started 2 months ago. She was sorry. So in the span of roughly 1 week, Eli discovered that his closest friend had attempted to steal his company, his investors, and his romantic partner simultaneously. The Reddit post at this point was, as you can imagine, not entirely calm. But what Eli did next is what this community is really here for. He did not confront Bryce, not immediately. He called a lawyer, specifically an attorney who specialized in startup intellectual property. He brought the pitch deck with its original file timestamps, the email threads, the investor correspondences, his own documented year of development work, and his records of the verbal equity agreement. The attorney was direct. What Bryce had done constituted fraud in the context of seeking investment and a clear breach of the co-founder relationship. The IP was unambiguously Eli's. The attorney drafted a formal legal notice. Bryce received it on a Tuesday morning. According to Eli, the response was almost immediate. Bryce called him, apparently cycling through denial, then justification, then apology, then something that sounds like it was mostly about protecting himself. Eli didn't engage emotionally. He let his attorney handle the communication. The outcome? Bryce was formally removed from the company structure. Any potential equity claim he had, which was never documented and therefore essentially nothing, was dissolved. The investor relationships were addressed directly. Eli personally reached out to every investor contact Bryce had engaged, explained the situation factually, and several of them, including the woman who had initially tipped him off, chose to continue conversations with Eli directly and exclude Bryce entirely. One of them wrote back, "Honestly, I had a feeling something was off. The story kept changing slightly." The business, as of the time of the original post, was operational. Eli had brought on a proper co-founder, someone he'd met through an entrepreneurship network, with a signed and witnessed agreement on day one. As for Bryce and the girlfriend, they had, from what Eli could tell through mutual connections, attempted something of a relationship. It lasted, by his account, approximately 6 weeks before apparently dissolving. Eli ended his post with something that I've been thinking about since I read it. He wrote, "I don't want revenge. I just want the chapter to close. The business is real now. He's not in it. I think that's enough." The comments were full of people who found that ending unsatisfying, who wanted courtroom drama and a more cinematic destruction of Bryce's life. But I think Eli understood something that most of us have to learn the hard way. The best revenge isn't destruction, it's continuation. Building the thing they tried to take from you, living the life they bet against. That's the part that actually lasts.
All right. We are 3 stories deep. Wait, 2 stories deep. And already I feel like we need a moment because these stories are heavy in the best possible way. There's something about watching real people navigate real betrayal with real dignity that is both gutting and genuinely inspiring. Here is where I want to drop a midpoint thought, and it's actually something I'd love to hear your take on in the comments below. Every single person in today's stories, Marcus with his 3-drive backup system, Eli with his quiet phone calls and legal firepower, they all had one thing in common. They didn't react from the wound, they responded from the strategy. And I think that gap between reaction and response is where karma actually lives. It's not some cosmic automatic process. In most of these stories, the person who was wronged had to create the conditions for justice to happen. They had to be clear, they had to be patient, they had to trust that the truth, properly documented and properly presented, would eventually be enough. It's a harder way to live, but it seems to work. Comment below. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to wait for justice instead of charging at it? Because I think this community has some stories worth hearing. Now, Let's get into story 3. And I want you to know, I saved this one for last on purpose, because this one doesn't involve a workplace or a startup. This one is about family. And if you've ever had a complicated family situation, and let's be real, who hasn't? This one is going to hit very differently.
Story 3. My aunt spent 6 years convincing my grandmother I was ungrateful. Then, Grandma changed her will twice in 2 days. This was posted on r/JustKnowFamily, a subreddit that exists specifically for navigating the kind of family dynamics that you genuinely cannot make up, by a user called Quiet Garden Girl. And it's the kind of story that has every layer. There's grief, there's manipulation, there's loyalty, and there is, at the very end, a piece of justice so elegant that it almost doesn't feel accidental. Our storyteller, let's call her Nadia, grew up very close to her maternal grandmother, a woman she describes as sharp, warm, fiercely independent, and the kind of person who sees through nonsense faster than anyone she's ever met. Nadia's maternal aunt, her grandmother's daughter, let's call her Vivian, had always had a complicated relationship with the family. Vivian lived about 40 minutes from Nadia's grandmother, had never moved far, and had positioned herself over the years as the family's primary caregiver and central figure. She drove Grandma to appointments. She organized the holiday dinners. She was, on the surface, deeply devoted. But underneath that surface, according to Nadia and eventually to others in the family, Vivian had been operating a very specific, very long-running campaign. For years, she had been quietly narrating a version of Nadia to their grandmother that was not true. Nadia lived several states away, having moved for her career in her mid-20s. She called her grandmother every week, sometimes twice. She flew back for birthdays, for Thanksgiving, for the occasional random Tuesday when she felt the pull to just go see her. She sent handwritten letters, actual paper letters, because her grandmother preferred them, and Nadia genuinely loved writing them. But Vivian's version of Nadia, as reported to Grandma, was different. According to Vivian, Nadia was too busy for the family. Nadia never really called. Nadia had moved away and basically forgotten where she came from. Nadia was selfish. Vivian's campaign was slow, consistent, and perfectly calibrated. She didn't paint Nadia as a monster. She painted her as someone absent. And absence, when you're an elderly woman living 40 minutes from one daughter and several states from a granddaughter you love, is a wound that's very easy to make bleed slowly. Nadia noticed something shifting in her grandmother's tone over the years, a slight distance, an occasional reference to feeling forgotten, a comment here and there that seemed to echo a narrative Nadia didn't recognize as real. She didn't fully understand what was happening. She assumed it was age or occasional miscommunication, and she just tried to show up more. The grandmother's health began to decline when she was in her mid-80s. Vivian became more present than ever, understandably, practically, and also more controlling. She managed the medical appointments, managed the communications with the rest of the family, and managed what the grandmother knew about who had called, who had written, and who had asked about her. During one of Nadia's visits, something happened that changed the trajectory of everything. Nadia was sitting with her grandmother one afternoon, just the two of them, while Vivian had stepped out, and her grandmother made a comment that stopped Nadia cold. She said, "I know you have your life, sweetheart. I understand you don't always have time to call." Nadia stared at her and said, "Grandma, I call you every week, sometimes twice." Her grandmother went quiet. Then she said, "I don't always get the messages, I think." They sat there together, and something that had been blurry for years suddenly became very clear. Nadia started paying attention in a different way. She began keeping a log, dates, times, and duration of every call she made to her grandmother's landline and cell phone. She started saving the voicemails she left when there was no answer. She kept every text sent to her grandmother's phone, which Vivian had set up for her and monitored. She kept every letter receipt. And slowly, She also started talking more directly with her grandmother, less chatty, more real. She asked questions, she listened differently, and her grandmother, who was sharp enough to understand that something was being communicated without it being stated, began to respond in kind. Over the course of several months, through careful, quiet conversation, her grandmother began to understand that the portrait of Nadia she'd been handed was not the original painting. And here is where I have to say, with complete respect for how painful this must have been, the grandmother handled it in a way that speaks to exactly who she described her as. She didn't make a scene, she didn't confront Vivian explosively. She made 2 phone calls. The first was to her attorney. Her will, at that time, had been arranged to leave the bulk of her estate, including a property that had significant sentimental and financial value, the family home, primarily to Vivian, with smaller provisions for Nadia and other relatives. The rationale, as the attorney confirmed it had been explained to him over years, was that Vivian was the one who had always been there. Grandmother asked for a revision. The second call was to a secondary attorney, a different firm, who conducted an independent review. This is significant. She was protecting against any future challenge to her cognitive state or the legitimacy of the revision. She was, in her 80s, with declining health, setting up a legal fortress around her own final decision. The revised will distributed the estate differently. The family home went to Nadia. Vivian's share was adjusted to reflect what the grandmother described to the attorney and what the attorney documented as a recalibration based on a fuller understanding of the facts.
Vivian found out after the grandmother passed, roughly 14 months after the will revision.
The response was apparently volcanic. Vivian contested. She argued diminished capacity. She argued undue influence. Ironically, the very mechanism she had used for years turned back on her in the legal proceeding. But the independent attorney review, the documentation of the grandmother's clear communication during both appointments, and the specific phrasing the grandmother had used to explain her reasoning, a recalibration based on a fuller understanding of the facts, made the contest extremely difficult to sustain. Nadia was, by the time she posted on Reddit, in the middle of the legal process and not yet fully through it, but she wrote, "Grandma knew. She knew, and in the end, she did what she always did. She figured it out herself and handled it without anyone's help." That's the part I keep coming back to. I didn't win anything. She just finally had the whole picture. The comments on this post were thousands deep. People who had lived their own versions of this. People who had lost to a version of this. People who are in the middle of it right now. But the through line in the best comments and in the story itself is the same one that runs through every story we've covered today. Truth, given enough space and enough patience, tends to find its way into the light. You can build false narratives. You can manage information. You can shape what someone believes about another person for a very long time. But human beings, real ones, the kind who built their character over 80 years of living, they eventually feel something that doesn't add up. They eventually ask the question. And when they do, if the truth is right there waiting for them, clearly and patiently and without drama, the truth wins.
3 stories. 3 completely different arenas. The workplace, the startup world, the family home. 3 completely different sets of people doing something universally human, choosing to trust someone and having that trust shattered. But what I find remarkable, and I mean this genuinely, not just as a way to wrap things up neatly, is that in every single one of these stories, the person who was wronged chose a very specific path. They chose precision over explosion. Marcus didn't storm into his CEO's office, he built a file. Eli didn't call Bryce and scream on the phone, he called a lawyer. Nadia didn't go to war with Vivian at the family dinner table. She started keeping a log, and she started having honest conversations with the one person whose understanding actually mattered. None of these outcomes were guaranteed,
Any one of them could have gone differently. Marcus's CEO might not have listened. Eli's investors might have walked away entirely. Nadia's grandmother might never have had that quiet afternoon conversation where the truth slipped through. But they all made the same bet, that the truth, presented clearly and calmly, with evidence and without hysteria, has a better chance than noise. And in these three cases, all three of them, that bet paid off. I think about this a lot in the context of what this channel is about. Venture and karma isn't just about watching bad things happen to bad people and feeling satisfied about it. It's about understanding the mechanism. It's about studying the actual geometry of how the universe balances its books, because it does balance them. Maybe not on your timeline, maybe not in the way you imagined, but there's a pattern here across thousands of these stories, and the pattern is this. The people who win the long game are almost never the loudest people in the room. They're the ones who documented everything, the ones who waited, the ones who trusted that clarity is more powerful than volume. And the people who lose, they tend to have one thing in common. They forgot that other people notice inconsistencies. Investors notice when a story changes slightly. Grandmothers notice when the math doesn't add up. CEOs notice when a lead strategist can't explain the emotional soul of a concept they supposedly created. The house of cards, no matter how carefully constructed, eventually meets a gentle breeze.
Before we go, I want to hear from you, and I mean that in the most specific way possible. Drop in the comments which of these three stories hit you hardest and why. Was it Marcus and the stolen presentation? The workplace betrayal that so many people have lived in some version? Was it Eli and the co-founder situation? The reminder that handshakes without paper are just handshakes? Or was it Nadia and her grandmother? The one that reminds us that the people we love are often more perceptive than we give them credit for, and that some reckonings happen quietly in the most private rooms. Tell me in the comments, because the reason this channel exists is because these stories are real, and they deserve to be in conversation with each other and with you. And listen, if you've been watching Venture and Karma for a while, you know how this goes. But if this is the first video you've ever seen from us, I want to make you a specific promise before you leave. Every single week, this channel puts out a new batch of stories. Some are about workplaces, some are about families, some are about relationships and friendships, and the specific kind of trust that gets built between two people over years, and what happens when one of them treats that trust like a resource to be extracted rather than a bond to be kept. We don't do shallow here. We don't do rage bait. We do real. The kind of real that takes time to tell properly. The kind that you'll still be thinking about 3 days from now when you're in the shower or driving somewhere and your brain suddenly goes back to Marcus sitting in that meeting watching his own slides. If that's what you're looking for, subscribe right now. Hit the bell. You'll never miss a story, and I can promise you, the archive alone is worth the trip. This community is growing, and it's growing because the people in it are genuinely thoughtful. They're not here just for the satisfaction. They're here because they believe something that I believe too, that how we respond to betrayal is one of the most defining things about us. That patience is not weakness, that documentation is not paranoia, that waiting for the right moment is not cowardice. It's strategy, and strategy applied to the right situation with the right evidence at the right time, that's where karma stops being a wish and starts being a fact. Thank you for spending this time with me today, genuinely. These stories take time to do properly, and the fact that you watched all the way through means more than you know. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of each other out there, and remember, the universe is watching. It just takes notes slower than you do.